Good day, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of Unleash with FTEM, Unleash with From the Expert's Mouth. And today we have a guest which is very different from all the other conversations we have. And we promise you that it's going to be a riveting experience and you don't know what's going to be coming up next because we have with us Col Shyam. Col Shyam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rajiv.
Right. So before we get deeper into the conversation, a little bit of brief background about Col Shyam. So Shyam, if you could introduce yourself and maybe run through your experience of what you've done in the army for about 15 odd years, I guess, and then the switch to the corporate career, and then we'll get deeper into each of the two segments.
Yeah, sure, Rajiv. First of all, thank you so much for hosting me in your show. The first time we got connected, I think it was more of a casual conversation, and I really liked the way in which our conversation went, and of course I came to know about what you are currently doing. It really interested me, and here we are today. So in your show. So as you said, I have an army background, so I'll just go through in a very brief manner about kind of an introduction and my background. So I was born in the capital city of Chennai. Okay, I think you're all aware that Chennai is the capital of Tamil Nadu. So I'm the second son to my parents. So I did my schooling and college in the same city. So after completing my electrical engineering degree from University of Madras, I started teaching. So I loved the job of teaching because I've seen my father, who is a teacher of mathematics and physics, and throughout my schooling days, he used to conduct a lot of classes in the house. So that quite influenced me. So I started my career in teaching. So at that time, you might be aware that there was no internet. So we all used to apply jobs through advertisements, seeing the newspapers. So I kept applying for multiple jobs and wrote a lot of entrance exams, but I was unable to get any break. Okay. So during that time, I had applied for. I saw an advertisement in the newspaper stating that technical graduates are needed in the Indian Army. Okay, in the Short Service Commission. So it was a very attractive advertisement. So I went for it. So I applied for it and forgot about it. So once I was teaching, the call letter had come to my house, and even my parents were surprised looking at it because it was written Indian Army. So they asked me, "Oh yeah, you applied for Indian Army. So what is the problem?" I said, "There is no problem. That's why I have applied for it." So even I was a bit surprised because I forgot about it. So, but just like I got inspired by my father in teaching, my father's father, that's my grandfather, was a retired colonel in the Indian Army.
Okay.
He retired as a colonel and he was a doctor during the Britishers' rule, and he was under the British Indian Army. So he served during the World War II, and he used to share a lot of stories. And by that time I applied, he was still alive. He was living with us. Okay. So that influence was also there. So that was the reason I applied. And once the call letter came, I thought of why not give it a go. So, so that time I was working. So this call letter came, and then the interview was in Bangalore. So I've hardly traveled outside Chennai other than just going to a few places during the holidays. Otherwise, I've rarely traveled. So at that point of time, I had to travel to Bangalore and then attend this 5-day interview. So it was 5 days. And another challenge was like how to get 5 days of leave from the college. So I really struggled to speak to my principal. So I was sharing it one day with one of my colleague. And that colleague went to the principal and told that Shyam has received a call letter from army, and he is afraid speaking to you because he needs 5 days of leave. And at luck would have it, the principal called me, and then he told me, "Why are you not going?" I said, "Sir, I never thought about it." At luck would have it, my principal is a very old fellow, and he had given the SSB interview during his time.
Okay, all right.
So he said it's a wonderful interview. So why not you go and try it? So I took a few tips from him because I hardly knew what was coming in the interview, and I didn't have much so many days to prepare. So it was just about a week and 10 days remaining. So I made the preparation and then went to Bangalore. Uh, so I gave the 5 day interview, and at the end of the fifth day, they gave the result, and I was surprised that I got selected.
Oh,
So
wow.
and again about 10 days of medicals, and then and then finally I got selected, and I received the call letter to join for training. And the training was also in my hometown. It was an officers training academy where short service commissioned officers are trained. So typically the training goes for about a year and a half, and they are the basic. It's a basic military training. Okay. So of course, completed training, got commissioned as a officer, and then of course next 15 years kind of a roller coaster ride in different parts of India, different roles, different responsibilities, challenges, and did about 15 years, and then decided to quit and join the corporate world, and it's been about 4 years now.
Okay,
Yeah, that's the brief background.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's very interesting. You got drawn into the army quite by chance and by luck, and it wasn't something that you had consciously planned. Maybe there were
yeah,
those deep-seated seeds of joining the army because of the stories that you may have heard from your grandfather. I think those
yeah,
things definitely have a great influence on us, whether consciously or
yeah,
subconsciously,
yeah,
influence the direction of our lives and our
yeah,
career choices.
yeah,
Right. So, what kind of, because you mentioned you joined in a very different sort of role in the army because I think it was the technical services, right?
yeah.
So, what were the different kind of roles you did and what was the overall experience of those 15 odd years in the army?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good question. Since I had a electrical engineering background, typically you join after engineering course. There's something called as the technical entries. So there are three streams in the Indian Army where they take technical officers. One is the core of signals. So other one is the core of engineers, and then we have the electrical and mechanical engineering background. So typically there are three bases. So I got into the core of signals. So core of signals is something like responsible for provision of voice and data communication to the armed forces, both during peace as well as during war. So as you might be aware, there are a lot of peace areas in which army is there. Not only army, I'll talk about the armed forces. That means navy as well as air force. So there are a lot of peace areas in which they are deployed, and deployed even in the forward areas like the border towns of Rajasthan and J&K and typically Arunachal Pradesh. Army is deeply concentrated there. So in both these places, the core of signals is responsible for provision of communication. So typically I got into this technical arm of providing communication. So once I did my basic military training, we get commissioned as officers, and then we undergo our specialization training. So specialization training is typically about 6 to 9 months in duration, and that is conducted in Military College of Telecommunication Engineering. That's near Indore. So there we underwent our second phase of training, and then we got commissioned. So typically, we get posted to various units. So every 2.5 years, our units and profiles keeps changing. And so typically, unit is a place uh, where there's a clear structure in the Indian Army, where the lowest unit is called as a regiment. Okay, so regiment has got, of course, hierarchies below that. I will not go into each and every hierarchy, but so typically, regiment is where we get posted. So regiment has got a task, depends on where they are present. For example, in the northeast, your task might be different. But the regiment, if it is in Jammu and Kashmir, your task might be different. Though it might be a provision of communication, but there are terrain differences. So northeast is full of like jungle, and typically in Jammu and Kashmir, it is mountainous in nature. And when you are posted in Rajasthan, it's all desert. So the kind of equipments vary, and the tactics and how we deploy communication varies. So this is how a unit is designed. So they are given a task, and you get posted as an officer to the unit. So typically you rise in your rank and service, and then you progressively experience various different kinds of tasks which you undergo, and then you keep learning. It's kind of a on the job kind of training, you know.
Right.
um, and there's a tremendous support network. So there are set of officers in the unit who always support you, and then you keep observing and learning from them. It's a kind of as I already said, it's kind of on the job training, where you study the theory part, of course, during the training times, and then you see it how it unfolds.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a progressive in nature, and we are given responsibility based on the amount of years we put in. So typically in the beginning, you are not given much responsibility. You are put everywhere. You are supposed to be everywhere, learn everything, put your hands on everything, dirty your hands, be with the soldiers, stay with them, and then learn the art of soldiering, and then so that's how it starts. And typically your responsibility keeps increasing
Right.
as you put in more service, where you come into the your core job of providing communication. What are the challenges in that? How to deal with the various kinds of situations. So that's how it is. Uh, so typically, I did about 15 years, rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the army, and that's the maximum a short service commissioned officer can reach.
Okay.
And then typically in the 15 years, I got posted to around 5 to 6 places, different places, where I had varied kind of experience in both peace locations as well as field locations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, few interesting things you mentioned. One of them, and given that you've switched career track to HR now, you spoke a lot about how people get trained in the army and what the structures are like.
Yeah.
And now you've been working in a corporate for about 4 odd years. So, how do you contrast the approaches to organization structures in the army versus the corporate? And secondly, the approach to training and ownership of work, largely speaking, in the army versus, say, in a typical corporate structure.
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I think when we compare structure-wise, the armed forces, how it is structured, and the way corporate is structured, okay, there are a lot of differences. So typically, I'll start with the army structure. The army structure is very hierarchical in nature, because the kind of work we do, hierarchy is the best suited structure. Because not only how people work, but even the workforce, as well as they're all structured very hierarchically. As I told very clearly to you, for example, a regiment. Let's start with the regiment on top. Okay, so a regiment typically has three companies. Okay, and again those three companies are divided into three sections, and those three sections are divided into three platoons. So the lowest fighting unit is called as a platoon. Okay, so and then it keeps going up. So platoon to section, and section to a company, and company to a regiment. And typically a regiment comes under a brigade. So under a brigade there are three regiments typically.
Okay.
Okay, and so brigade, there are three brigades under a command. Okay, under a corps, and there are three corps under a command, and there are commands under the Indian Army. So it is very hierarchical structure.
Right.
And even our reporting structures are very hierarchical. In the unit, when you see, if you are a section commander, you are reporting to a platoon commander, and the platoon commander in turn reports to the company commander, and the company commander reports to the commanding officer of the unit. So,
Right.
so it's a very hierarchical structure, and even the tasks are even divided in a very hierarchical manner. So there are tasks typically given to a section, which a section is supposed to do, and typically a platoon where there are three sections, and there are tasks given to the platoon, which is divided. The tasks are divided to the sections. So even when you speak in terms of how the task flows, it flows through this hierarchy, and the rank structure also flows through this hierarchy. The lowest ranked officer is put as a platoon commander, and the highest ranked officer is the commanding officer. So the rank structure as well as the way in which we carry out a task also flows from this hierarchical structure. And typically there is an understanding among the civilians that army is a very rigid organization.
Right.
When it comes to the structure, it's quite rigid, I should say, but
Right.
it is not rigid in the way you are carrying out your task.
Okay.
Once you are working within the unit, you can always brainstorm ideas, and then how you're going to do the task. Okay, because there are you can actually bring in a lot of innovation. Sometimes there is an understanding that if an order is passed, you are not supposed to question the order. Okay, you are supposed to just carry it out. But
Right.
yeah, at one sense it is true, but another sense, how you carry out the task, there is a lot of freedom.
Okay.
So you will have to bring out the result, but how you do it is in your hands. Okay, it depends on the experience which you carry. But most of the time it doesn't happen according to a standard operating procedure, because the challenges are so different, and typically it cannot be covered in operating procedure. So every time you get a task, you do it with a lot of innovation, and so that's how it is structured. So
Right.
so everything
And yeah,
flows from this.
that's
Yeah,
yeah, and as you rightly said, that is quite contrary to the popular perception, because the popular perception is indeed that there are very rigid standard operating procedures, and not just rigid maybe policies, frameworks, and guidelines which of course you would die for, but you know this is the fact that there is innovation on the ground, and there is uh, you know a free hand given in that sense
yeah,
to people to execute the desired objective in the
yeah,
manner that they deem fit on the ground given the circumstances is,
yeah,
I think, unique, because uh, there cannot be any standard operating procedure for a crisis situation or
yeah,
for untoward circumstances, which I'm sure are everyday affairs in the army.
yeah. Yeah, I think you brought a very important point. We do have standard operating procedures for every, but typically when a different kind of a task comes, SOPs are there as a background. Okay, just like organizations have their SOPs, like they
Right.
have their core values.
Mhm.
But the way in which they do business is there is a lot of innovation, right? But it is always on the background of maintaining its core values. So
Right.
typically, in the armed forces, we have those core values, just like an organization has. So we do have SOPs, the way in which we'll have to typically carry out a particular task. But beyond those SOPs, we actually operate beyond SOPs. Though it is there as a background, of course, during training, these SOPs come into the picture. How to do the thing rightly in the right way. But there are a lot of assumptions in an SOP, right?
Right.
So if everything happens according to the plan, SOPs work really good, but nothing happen according to plan. So
Correct.
so that's why the innovation kicks in, and of course there's organization knowledge is also there. So typically a senior officer, you should have faced a similar situation before, and he shares those insights with you. These cannot be found in any textbook, but he will give you very practical ideas. He or she gives a very practical idea about this is how you'll have to do it, that's how I did it. This may not be the right way and the only way. You can always amend it, but this is how I did it. Okay, so the organizational knowledge is quite strong, and there are different kinds of there are a lot of diversity in the armed forces nowadays. It is increasing. You might have heard that now lady officers are also coming in the National Defense Academy.
Right.
We have lady officers since 1992. That was the first time lady officers came into the Indian Army. So now currently in any unit, when there are 10 officers, there are 2 to 3 lady officers. So there is gender diversity, a lot of gender diversity, and diversity in place of in diversity, regional diversity is there. Officers could typically come from different parts of India. So I have seen, in one unit where we were around 12 officers posted, and we had officers from more than 8 states. You know,
Okay.
I was from Tamil Nadu, somebody was from Kerala, and somebody was from Haryana. Somebody was from JNK, and one was from Maharashtra. So there is a lot of regional diversity. Okay, so
Right.
and there are people with different backgrounds. I have gone with electrical engineering, and there was one person with a commerce background. Okay, and there was one with a BSc background, and there was one person even started doing his engineering in IIT, dropped out of IIT and joined army. So
Oh,
you get different kinds of people, and there is tremendous diversity, and even among the Javans, so there is tremendous diversity in Corps of Signals. Typically, we have Javans from more than around 15 to 20 states in a unit. So you get a group of 100 people. In that, you will find people from more than 10 to 12 states. So there is a
right,
lot of diversity and
right,
organization knowledge which flows through the organization, and it's how a typically Indian Army unit works. So, so structure-wise, coming back to your first question of structure, so this is how an Indian Army operate, and when I compare it with the corporate, I would say that I don't have much experience, but the exposure in which I have, corporate has got different kind of structures, the way in which they do business, right? Typically, I have not seen any hierarchical structure. I have seen kind of a matrix structures where there are
right,
multiple reportings, and sometimes there are flat structures. Okay, so depending on the type of business, whatever structure best suits them,
right,
they adapt. So typically, when you see the basic management principles have come from the armed forces only. When you study the literature, you will see that the learnings during the World War II. Okay,
right,
and there are a lot of management principle which was learned from preparing for World War II and conducting those World War II operations. So a lot of books were written, and basic management principle sprung from that, from military. But
right,
military has remained where it is. Okay, when it comes to structure, it has not changed much, but the corporate has totally changed. So,
right.
they typically the business landscape has changed a lot. So typically they have maintained different kind of structure to suit the way in which they do business. I think that's the difference between these two.
Right.
I would say, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing that we spoke about, which was the training and the cultural aspect of it. The way, as you mentioned, people speak to their seniors or the peers, and they share each other's experiences, and that's how they learn. So there's a very famous part of the rigid training that somebody in the army goes through. But in addition to that, I think there's a huge amount of this cultural orientation which happens right through the stint, that during the period when one is in the army, of how you learn from each other's experiences, and stories kind of get passed down generations
Yeah.
and ranks, and that's how a strong culture is built. And I think there's a lot to learn, particularly from a corporate India or India Inc. standpoint, especially in these times when people are working remotely, and building a culture seems to be an impossible task, because people are joining over Zoom calls, or remotely they are working from anywhere. So are there any lessons that you have from maybe your experience in the forces, which can help corporate India, or some experiences you want to share on that front?
Yeah, sure. I think when you see Indian Army is a very successful organization. Typically you might have seen the different kind of operations that Indian Army gets involved into. I would take the example of disaster management. Even during the flash floods in Uttarakhand, you might have seen the kind of work Indian Army does. Okay,
Right,
that's just not only Indian Army. I would say the Air Force as well as the Navy, the armed forces does. So how they are so successful? So when you ask this question, it is deeply ingrained in the culture of the organization, and so they have a very clearly laid out culture, and right from selection um, to onboarding of an officer, um, uh, to the way in which they do the career progression, the training, the ongoing training which happens during the services. The culture aspect is very strongly, ingrained in each and every stage of the whole life cycle of an officer. And I would say officer. I will not say. I will not bring Javans into the picture now, because officers play a very major role, just like leaders in the um, corporate culture. In a company, leaders play a major role in setting the context as well as setting the culture of the organization. So typically officers play a major role. They have this responsibility in their shoulders. So just like the selection process, let us start from the selection process. The service selection board interview is a very tough interview. There is it's a 5-day interview, as I told
Yeah,
in the
that
beginning.
itself, I
Yeah,
was also curious to understand,
yeah,
what is a 5-day interview like?
yeah. So the first day is a kind of a screening where you are put through different kinds of situations, okay, and how you respond. They
So
kind of
behavioral
gauge your,
interview.
yeah. So it's a kind of a lot of audio visual thing happens where they show you different kind of pictures and then ask your initial reactions. There isn't much time to respond. So typically, when you prepare and come, you cannot give a response to those questions because the time is limited, and they will put you through multiple exercises. So typically, the screening happens, and then they do a initial screening. For example, in my batch, around 300 people had come for screening, and out of which only 100 were selected in the first day. And then after screening, they divide us into batches and then put us through different kinds of group tasks as well as individual tasks. So there's an officer who sits along with us who keeps giving us the task and noting down our responses, how we are acting. So he will be like kind of a invisible person around. He says, "Just forget about me and you just do the task." So he just watches us and sees and makes his own report. So it's 4 days is full of these different kinds of tasks like group discussions, and there are psychometric tests, and the typical kind of group task, individual task where you carry out and your report is made, and then the selection is done. Sometimes the whole batch there is a washout. They don't even select a single person. So
Okay.
it happened in my previous batch where more than 300 people had come and nobody got selected. And even in my batch, only two of them got selected. So it's more of a rejection procedure, I would say, and they typically look for a few characteristics in an individual, which even if some characteristics are not there, something which can be trained. Okay, so they have their unique method of evaluation, and the Defense Institute of Psychological Research, what we call it as DAPR. So we have individuals who have designed the SSB interviews are designed by them. The psychometric tests are designed by DIPR officials, okay, who are trained in very highly trained in psychology. And for selection, typically a board sits where your officer who observed you will have his say, and the psychologist also sits there and then gives out the psychological profile of the individual. So coming back to the culture point, right from selection, so this is how a selection is done. So they are very very clear about whom to take. And then the training is quite tough. So there is no guarantee that you got selected in the SSB interview and become an officer. You will have to undergo 1.5 years of training, basic military training, where sometime you should have watched in the movie Laksh, where
Yeah.
Hrithik Roshan tried to run away. So there are people who try to run away, and then people who actually run away also, because it is kind of physically and psychologically very straining.
Right.
And because that basic military training, you are put under seniors, and then the whole day you are not allowed to sleep, and then you are given different kinds of tasks physically, mentally. So uh, so, uh, so in the beginning, you tend to break out,
Right.
but you watch others, and then there's a lot of camaraderie, and then you start thinking at some point of time that, of course, we are not going to die. There are people who have passed out before us, and
Right.
there'll be people passing out after us as well. So it is no big deal. Just go through the process. Okay. So the process becomes very important. So training is uncompromising.
Hmm.
So there are people, ethics is of highest standards, because somebody who tried to, there are a lot of tests, somebody tried to cut a shortcut or something, they are failed and they are sent out.
Right.
So it's a kind of zero tolerance policy when it comes to
Right.
ethics,
Yeah.
integrity. It's kind of zero tolerance. So that's where it's all ingrained, right from training days. And it is not about you; it is about your group. So even if you do something wrong, the punishment the whole group gets.
Right.
So you share the responsibility of the group,
Right.
okay, and you carry the weakest person along. So that's how we are trained. So that's where typically it comes. So, and we also play a lot of games, of course. The sense of competition is also there, both in studies as well as games. So when I typically came into armed forces, I thought I'll put an end to studies. So I had a typical thing in my mind that now I'm going to just do soldiering. Okay, but
Right.
a typical life an officer, you have to keep upgrading yourself. There are a lot
Hmm.
of courses which keeps coming. and learning grading in those courses actually determines your upward path in the armed forces.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
you will have to do really well in your courses and in
Mhm.
your career as well. So your course gradings uh, takes a very major part. So
Right.
I came to know that okay, studies are also very important, and they put me through a lot of different kinds of courses, and then so this is how typically it does. So the culture is ingrained even in the courses, in the units. There is a common thread. Okay, we may be part of different kinds of unit. For example, my course mates, some of them become went into infantry, some of them went into corps of artillery where they operate big guns,
Right.
and some went into armored regiments, like they drive the tanks. So but though there are different kinds of regiments, there we're all uh, we share a very common thread, because we got trained together, and we have our course mates spread along different services.
Right.
You grow together, and then there is a lot of camaraderie and a lot of support structure which
Right.
is there. And seniors take a lot of responsibility on you.
Mhm.
Once you are put under somebody, like a mentor to you, they take a lot of responsibility about you, about your growth, about your training,
Right.
about your onboarding, about your learnings. So they take a lot of responsibility personally, because that's how the unit culture is built.
Right.
So a winning culture is built in that fashion. So nobody is a Superman here. We all nobody is a commando. We all work together as a unit. As a unit, we are very very successful. But as an individual, we may not be. But as units, we do anything for the unit. Like unit izzat is
Right.
that's what we call it in Hindi. Unit izzat comes the topmost priority.
Right.
Your own comfort and safety comes last. The
Right.
unit izzat comes on top.
Right.
So this is how the culture is built. So
Yeah.
the armed forces typically has this kind of a structure, and that's how the culture is built at each and every stage in your career. Okay. So that's why
Right.
it is important. So coming back to your question, these are the things where when an organization looks to build its culture, it has to see that it is not something which is displayed on the notice boards, right? It
Right.
is something where the leaders live through.
Correct.
So that's very important. It is very easy to make the document, but the most difficult thing is to live through the document.
Right.
You will have to really believe in what you are saying,
Right.
and it has to be in each and every part the way you function. It is not something like you say integrity is one of our core values, but you do business not in an ethical way,
Right.
and the employees start thinking that integrity is our core value, but we are not doing ethical business.
Right.
So typically you'll have to do what you say. That's
Right.
what they say. Like you'll have to maintain high standards of integrity, and I would say every organization has its core values, right? No organization wants to start their doing business in an unethical way. Any good organization always has its good structure, and they have their ethical structure built. But somehow some of them lose things in the middle, you know,
Right. Right.
because the focus is not there, and culture is not ingrained in the whole employee life cycle. At every
Right.
process, you'll have to see that how you can connect the work back into the core values and to the culture of the organization, which I think is very important. Successful organizations are already doing it, and that's how they are successful. There are organizations which are existed for more than 200, 300 years, right. So
Right.
those are organizations which have found the key, and that's how they are successful.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things which I could kind of infer from what you mentioned is because of the hierarchical structure, and there is you said unit key is that the unit is paramount. It doesn't mean that there is only one leader at the top. I think at every stage, at every hierarchical level, there is a leader, and they take full ownership of their unit and the units under them. So
Yes.
I think that is the major difference between, say, an army structure and if you were to compare it with, say, a corporate structure. I couldn't imagine a large corporate having highest levels of ownership at manager, assistant manager, junior manager, team lead level, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Typically all these things are left to maybe a VP or a senior VP, or the CEO or the business unit head.
Correct.
But it is not their understanding of their job description that they have to take things forward from a culture standpoint. It's always somebody else's problem. And yeah, there are loads and loads of lessons, I think, in the last 5-10 minutes of what you mentioned, which each one of them, if corporates kind of imbibe in their day-to-day working, or if they view the employee life cycle from this sort of lens, it can completely change their culture and bring them the kind of success that they can only right now dream of. But
Yeah.
yeah, so sorry, you were saying something.
Yeah. I think you brought a very important point, so when I came into the corporate world, of course, I came with a lot of preparation, but I knew what was coming my way. But when I started observing, and started interacting with my friends, corporate typically, you spoke about structure in your first question, So typically in the armed forces, though it is hierarchical structure, there are no silos, okay. But in an organization, there are a lot of silos. Like
Right.
HR typically does the HR work, and finance guy is trained in finance, and is responsible for the financial part of business. So typically, there are a lot of silos, and there are subject matter experts who take care of those silos. Okay, and the biggest challenge which has remained is that how to put all these people together and then make it a successful unit. Okay,
Right.
because typically, you start operating in a silo and you don't understand the other silo, but typically you have to work with each other, um, um, you know and you'll have to understand each other's problems and challenges. Only then you will be able to deliver your work really well. For example, as an HR, I cannot without understanding business, I cannot be a good HR professional. So I cannot just say that, okay, these are things which are this is my job and this is not my job. So you'll have to get into the business, and then you should be a good business partner. So typically, all other branches should be like a business partner. Finally, at the end of the day, we are going to make the business successful.
Right.
So this is one thing which I observed, where the mentality of silos is there, and organization leaders understand that these people have to work together, collaborate together. Okay, and they always speak about collaboration, because once they go up, they understand all that. You don't have to typically work in a silo. You will have to work together as a unit to reach the goal. So this becomes very important. Leaders, as I said, I think has a very important job. You know,
Right.
Even departmental heads have to be connected with each other departmental heads, and then that's where
Right.
they are going to bring in that collaboration. Okay,
Right.
I always believe on top-down approach.
Right.
Okay, because the bottoms up is very difficult, and sometimes it gets lost.
Right.
It doesn't have a direction. So that's how direction is always set by leaders, people at the top, because they do understand what are the challenges of business. And I think the biggest challenge now is collaboration, I would say.
Right. Yeah,
Collaboration is
absolutely.
the biggest challenge.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it is not the subject matter expertise, because subject matter expertise is available in the market, right? um, Collaboration, and of course, uh, ethics and integrity also plays a major part, in individual, as a business and also as individuals, because I've seen people who are not ethical, who really struggle in an ethical organization, and sometimes they get kicked out. Okay, and so ethics and integrity plays a major part, and of course collaboration. I think these two are the key, I should say,
Right.
um, in an
Yeah, and it's
organization to be
very,
successful.
very difficult. Even corporates struggle with this. How do you interview for this? How do you assess this? And that's where I think, the 5 day screening and the rigorous assessment process that was put in place, and, the psychometric test, the behavioral test, ingraining them in real life situations, not giving them time to react, so that you get the natural instinct of people out, and evaluating that natural instinct, I think, is the key. And of course, those are the processes based on which the army has become a successful organization. And I think there is a lot to learn, even though maybe corporates cannot call employees for 5 days screening interviews, but at least they can do
Yeah,
simulations and role plays, etc., to
yeah,
bring out the natural instinct in people. There are many ways around it.
yeah,
So yeah, there is a lot to learn, and it has such a profound impact on the success and the robustness of an organization.
yeah,
Because if you don't do this right, you will get silos, you will get people at odds with each other, you will find internal competition versus competing with the market forces, and so on
yeah,
and so forth. So yeah,
yeah,
there is there are actually a lot of things to learn and take from, rather than the stereotypical image of just taking discipline and rigid structures from the army.
Yeah,
There is so
yeah.
much more. There is fluidity, collaboration, taking the team together, etc.